Good morning. Thank you for being here this morning. Written about 156 AD, within a year of the events to be described, is an authentic eyewitness report to the heroic death of an elderly man named Polycarp. Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna, today the city of Izmir, on the west coast of Turkey. He's part of a generation of church leaders that succeeded the apostles. According to one tradition, he was taught by John the Apostle and was appointed to his office by the apostles themselves. As the story opens in this adaptation of the Martyrdom of Polycarp, a local persecution of Christians has been going on. Some of Smyrna's Christians have already been put to death. Polycarp was brought before the proconsul. He also tried to persuade them to deny the faith. Respect your age, he said. Swear by the divine power of Caesar. Change your mind. Say, away with the atheists. But Polycarp, with a solemn look at the unruly mob at the stadium, pointed to them, looking up to heaven, said, away with the atheists. The proconsul urged him harder. Take an oath and I'll let you go. Curse Christ. 86 years have I served him, and he never did me any wrong, replied Polycarp. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? When the proconsul kept insisting, swear by the divine power of Caesar, Polycarp answered, if you vainly suppose that I will swear by the divine power of Caesar, as you say, and if you pretend that you do not know who I am, listen plainly. I am a Christian. And if you wish to learn the Christian message, arrange a meeting and give me a hearing. I have wild animals, the proconsul said. I'll throw you to them unless you change your mind. Call them in, replied Polycarp, for we are not allowed to change from something better to something worse. Scorn with the wild beasts, I'll have you burned alive if you do not change your mind. Polycarp said, you threaten with fire that burns a short time and is soon quenched. You do not know about the fire of the coming judgment and eternal punishment that awaits the wicked. But why are you waiting? Come, do what you will. Immediately they began to pile wood around him. They were going to nail him to the stake as well, but Polycarp said, leave me the way I am. He who gives me power to endure the fire will help me remain in the flames without moving, even without being secured by nails. History bears out that Polycarp was indeed martyred in this fashion. I don't know about the nails part there at the end. The rendition read for you comes from Catholic records, as Polycarp is considered one of the first leaders of the Catholic Church, as they claim all of the church. From most understandings of the time, the Catholic Church at the time would follow very close to what we would consider accurate faith. This morning we get to talk about a really joyous topic. It's not. We are looking at the last beatitude that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount. That is where the base of our scripture comes from. It's Matthew chapter 5 and verse 12. I told you last month I was pairing persecution verses 10 and 11. I am now scraping 11 off and using it here as the gateway to get to verse 12. What is important in verse 12 is the fact that the persecution is to the point of that which the prophets received. If you were in our Bible class this morning, Tim spoke on that just a little bit in how Amos is introduced, and that the prophets were often scorned by those whom they were sent to, other than Jonah, and they were not treated well. So to take a direct step over from how were the prophets persecuted, we go to Jesus' own words, which he says in two different occasions, apparently in two different locations, But their words are borne out exactly the same in both scriptures, one held by Matthew, one held by Luke. And that is that Jerusalem is the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. And stones does not mean they threw rocks at them. The Jewish punishment of stoning was not to cause a concussion or to break a leg. It was to put someone to death. And we'll actually cover a stoning in just a moment. These are those who are blessed in the sight of the Lord. Now, if you go back, if you're still there at Matthew chapter 5, I said this wraps up the Beatitudes. And if you look at the scriptures before it and the ones that we've covered, it says, blessed are the divinely favored are, and then it lists something about them and a reward subsequently thereafter. The next verses that you come to, when you get to verse 13, 14, those thereon, Jesus doesn't point out something that's super high or super lofty or super difficult. He points out something that's very plain and very basic. You're the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. If you caught Mark's devotion on Friday, you are the only Bible the careless world will read. It's just very basic tenets. If you're going to be a Christian, this is how you're going to be perceived, and this is what the world will reap as a reward from you. So we're leaving the A-list, is what I mean by the ending of the Beatitudes Jesus lists in the Sermon on the Mount. So the one he culminates with. The last one, saving the best for last. If you have to lay down your life for the cause of Christ, divinely favored are you. Because you come from a history, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, you come from a history of a faith that is faith in the one true God, where God sends messages to people time after time saying, please get your life right. There's a way that I want you to live to be right in my sight. God sends that message through many prophets, and often their answer is, I'm going to kill you. Let's look at some of the biblical martyrs, those who have lost their lives for Jesus' sake. That's the definition of a martyr, someone who dies for a cause. Let's look at those who have died for Jesus' sake. First of all, one that we do know is going to die for Jesus' sake, although it's not listed in our scriptures, is Peter. Peter gets this terrific news from Jesus himself. After Jesus has been killed and raised, in John chapter 21, Jesus explains to him how he will die. That is the words at the end of, toward the end of John 21. He said this, Jesus said this to show him by what kind of death he was going to glorify God. And the description that is given is that when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, another will dress you and carry you to where you do not wish to go. Emulating that he would die on a cross, or at least with his hands outstretched. We do not have a biblical record of Jesus' death. It is kept in pretty sound and fairly well proven, though not biblical, evidenced that Peter was crucified in Rome upside down because he requested to be crucified upside down, saying he was not worthy to die the same death as his Lord. That would assume that he would die faster because he would have to push his entire body weight up, being upside down, to take a breath, or to exhale his breath, as it were. The first martyr that we read of in scriptures, and remember, this is martyrs for the cause of Christ, so they will all be in the New Testament. If you died in the Old Testament, you can't die for Christ. He had not yet come. But after Jesus, the very first martyr that we read of is James. Now, James and Peter are taken almost at the same time. James is taken, and he is put to death by the sword, as we read. And whenever Herod sees that, oh, that's a popular thing to do, I'll take Peter too. And he puts Peter in jail. He hides him beneath or in the midst of 4 squads of soldiers. Terrific Amy Grant song. And with 4 squads of soldiers who are all tasked with holding this man. Now, what is the punishment if he gets away? Roman punishment for a guard is that you suffer the fate of whomever you're guarding if they get away. 4 squads of soldiers that will now be put to death. Because in the next verses, at verses 6 through 11 of this chapter, describe an angelic jailbreak that's really cool. It starts off with the angel smacking him with a stick or kicking him, saying, "Get up, you don't belong here. God doesn't want you here." One of the reasons that we knew Peter wasn't going to be put to death then is because Jesus said what about his death? He's going to be old, and he's not yet old, and he was going to be crucified, and James was killed with the sword. James had no authority or right to kill Peter in this way because Jesus has said you're going to die in a different way. This should be an encouragement. If it is God's fate for you to suffer martyrdom for Him, it will be exactly what He has prescribed for you. Now, thankfully, Jesus has not come to any of you to tell you by which kind of death you will die. So, you kind of don't know. But what you can know is that if this is ever something you were to face, it's exactly what God has laid out for you. Not a terrific comfort, but it should at least be some comfort. You will only die the way that God has planned. Sermon on death comes later, toward the end of the month. Second martyr that we read of is Stephen. Stephen is preaching to the high priests, Pharisees, Sadducees. I'm not sure. I should have looked that exact group up. It's at the beginning of Acts chapter 7. And as he begins preaching, he gets to the end and says, basically, it's your fault Jesus is dead. You put him to death. And when they heard these things, Acts chapter 7, verse 54, they were enraged and ground their teeth at him. But he, full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God, Jesus standing at the right hand of man, and said, "Behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of God standing at their right hand." They rush him and they stone him to the point of death. And as he is dying, Stephen cries out, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." And falling on his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." And when he said this, he fell asleep. Now, the couple of questions I want to answer here. In the book of Acts, the word sleep, and actually in many of the writings of the New Testament, the word sleep is used instead of death because we are only dead for a short period of time. At the end of time, we will be raised for all of eternity. Those of us who are Christians, who have accepted faith in Jesus Christ, who have been crucified with Him in a watery grave of baptism, we will be raised like Jeremy read for us from 1 Corinthians chapter 15 this morning, which complements the lesson so wonderfully. It was hard for me to concentrate because I'm like, knock it out of the park, Jeremy. Do it great. And he did. Thank you. He fell asleep. Does not mean that they put a pillow under his head, a binky over him, and brought him his cuddly bear. It means he stopped breathing and his body was done until his spirit gets called from the grave. The other point, the main point that I want to point out here is that for all of those who are martyred, because this is the example that we have, a first-hand account of someone being martyred in Scripture, and actually it's the only account we have where we're walked through from the beginning to the end. There's a group of people. There is an individual who is a member of God's community, of His children. There's a sermon that is given, and this is the reaction that they give. This is God's reaction to that. Now, if I take you back to Acts chapter 2, something many of you are already familiar with, we're given those same elements. There are a group of people. They're listening to members of God's community give a message, right? They're babbling on. They're drunk. They're not drunk. It's only 9 a.m. They haven't had time yet. Listen to what they're saying. Peter preaches a sermon. He gets to the end, and it says that they were pricked in their hearts. So they commit to doing the general crowd commits to doing an action, and we're told at the end of the chapter what God does in response. They're baptized for the salvation of their souls, and what does God do? He adds to the church the number of those who are being saved. So we're shown this is what happens when God's child encounters a group, the message is preached, the reaction is given, here's God's response. Okay? This is the group that, his name's not John, Stephen. This is the group that Stephen encounters. The child of God delivers the message is received, their reaction is given, they stone him to death, and the reaction of God is given for us as well. Jesus is standing right there at the gates of heaven, as it poetically is stated. He's standing right at the gates of heaven, waiting to welcome him home. If it is that you find yourself in the situation where you will be martyred, we have no reason to expect otherwise for you. I won't go much further in affirming that I truly believe that. There's not a whole lot else to hang it on. It's the only example we're given. And it's also one that I want to believe. If I can be proven wrong, please share that with me. In Hebrews chapter 11, we are given the Hall of Fame of Faith. And it goes through great, as we've studied on Wednesday night, patriarchal leaders. And it goes through the lessons of Abraham and of Moses and those who had to do something and had to really put out for their faith in God. It cost them something. And as those examples begin to draw to an end, we go from honorable men who we know their faith. We know what Abraham did. He was going to sacrifice his son. We know what Moses did. He was going to sacrifice himself for the whole nation. Blot me out, but save your people. And then we get to people that aren't that great. You know, like Samson, the womanizer, who actually nothing positive is said about him in his entire life as a judge of Israel, except that he really liked women, would cut off other men's ability to make children so that he could have another woman. And then at the very end of his life says, I'm mad about things. God, if you'll give me strength one last time, I'll do some more killing for you. Or Jephthah, the judge Jephthah, who says, Lord, if you'll give me this victory, whatever comes out of my house first, I will put it to death for you. So as he comes home victorious from war, his little girl comes out, Daddy, you won! And he murders her, sacrifices her. So we go from great guys all the way down to some that I don't know what makes God love their faith so much. Maybe it gives hope for me. But again, ending with the strongest. Hebrews chapter 11. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they may rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. So they weren't quite killed like the other ones just were. They were stoned. And this is the one that really gets me, because my great-grandfather had one of those great big, he had several giant cross-cut saws. I'm sure you've got, Harold, I think you've got one, don't you? Giant cross-cut saws. And the teeth on them are like that deep. That is not going to slice flesh. It's going to snatch skin back and forth. It's going to pull the guts out back and forth. That's as gross as I'm getting. It's not a clean surgical procedure. It's nasty. And these people had this done to them. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy. They were the best in the world. They were the best Bible this careless world will ever read. You mean that guy that, yep, that guy, the world wasn't worthy of his very presence, of her very presence. The testimony that that saint gave, far beyond anything that we'll ever give. The world didn't even deserve something like that, but they were given to the world Now it doesn't say, blessed are the sawn in two. But I don't know how you read it and have that understanding be anything less. In Revelation chapter 6, and in picturing a question that is asked by God of those who are martyred, how long is it going to be until you repay those who murdered us for your name? That's the way the words come out in Revelation chapter 6. I saw under the altar, we'll come back there, the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness that they had borne. Later on, they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. There's a couple of things I want to point out. We'll go backwards in the order. These are those who had been slain for the cause of Christ. And it says in verse 11, that number is going to continue to increase. Until the end of time, until Jesus comes back, trumpet sounds, until we all stand up out of the clay, that number will continue to increase. An article from Christianity Today, published January 13th, 2021. Every day, 13 Christians worldwide are killed because of their faith. Every day, 12 churches or Christian buildings are attacked. Every day, 12 Christians are unjustly imprisoned or arrested, and another 5 are abducted. January 13th, 2021. I understand the source is a man-made source, and I understand that Christianity Today includes in their spectrum of Christianity a variety and a very wide range under that envelope of Christian. But the infidel don't care if you are one who is staunch to the Bible, or if your Christian church waves a pride flag out front. They're attacking you because of the name of Christ. And so in some ways these numbers are worth including. We're not done being persecuted to the point of death yet. It was not too long ago that it was a Church of Christ that a gunman came in and shot up, and was stopped, thankfully, by members of that congregation. Let's back up. They're given a white robe and told to rest a little while longer. I don't look forward to getting sown into. That really has got to be, other than being eaten by animals, like Polycarp. I have wild animals. I'll throw you to them. I think Polycarp came out on the better end by being burned alive. If you're just going to I'm a gross person, I'm telling you. I got a whole spectrum of weirdness. I think I'd rather be burned alive than be eaten by animals. But beyond that, I don't want to be sown into. That scene in Braveheart just really does it for me. But the end of it is rest. The statement that is given there is, they were given a white robe and they were told to rest just a little while longer. Your pain and your suffering, when your heart stops beating, when the Lord takes back what is His, it's done. That pain is over with. Go back and look at Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus is being comforted, and the martyrs are as well. Lastly, look at the beginning of this. They are under the altar of God. They are right there next to it. If you go to Revelation 15 and verse 8, you'll see that the Lord is with the altar in His tabernacle, and smoke fills it and nothing can come close. I just want to point out proximity. The Lord and the altar are all in the same spot. The altar of mercy is Jesus Christ. That sounds like pretty good proximity to me. If you're going to be taken home because of being martyred, you are so close to God when you get there. I don't know the exact proximity. I'm pointing out that these are all things that are pulled right tight together that God does not ignore. If you are martyred, that is something that will glorify God. This is the first one we looked at. The second one we looked at is that it's God's plan. If it's not for you, it's not for you. The third is that God is waiting and watching every single time this happens to take his servants home. And when he takes them home, he holds them close. One of those that we looked at was in Hebrews chapter 11. It was right at the end of chapter 11, so I think a good way to turn this, to wrap it, is to continue into chapter 12, because the word that is used to start chapter 12 is therefore. And I want to point out that this therefore is something that is not going to be so much fun. It's accusatory. These people were sown into the testimony that you might receive because of their actions. We're not even worthy of that. The world's not worthy of the testimony of those who have been beheaded, who have lost their life, that have been slain by the sword, have been crucified right side up or upside down, that have been set on fire, fed to animals, dipped in boiling tar, and then lit to shine on the gardens of the emperors while he throws dinner parties. The world is not worthy of the testimony of those who are taken out into the sand, having their blindfolds removed, and then having Arabic spoken over them as they have their heads removed. Because of them, this is what you do. Well, that's a high bar to set. But because people do have the faith to die for Christ, this is the bar that is set. So you have to pay attention. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, that is, number one, it's hard to live up to. Number two, it's something that we should take absolutely as a matter of faith. An argument that gets made against atheism. As often used in the modern argument for the truth of the resurrection of Jesus is that of martyrdom. The claim is that all the apostles would have had first-hand knowledge as to whether Jesus actually returned from the dead or confirmed that he was the Son of God. As they died, rather than admit the account was false, this suggests that rather than just believe it was true, like other martyrs in other faiths, they knew it was true for a fact. People do not willingly allow themselves to die for something they know is a lie. So the apostles really believed what they saw, talked with, touched, walked with, and even ate with was Jesus. In various group settings, after he died on the cross, in which he convinced them he was the Son of God, so they believed the bold proclaimers. So they became bold proclaimers when before they were doubters. What does that mean? I'm going to kill you unless you admit it's a lie. Damon, tell me the sky is pink. And then I say, I'm going to kill you unless you tell me the truth. How long are you going to keep telling me the sky is pink? You going to let me click the chamber once? But for every single one of the apostles, as it is known, and it is not really well known, there are good estimations for some, good evidences for some. There's not good evidences for all of the apostles, but it is generally accepted. And whether it's completely true is kind of irrelevant. None of them ever denounced their faith. None of them ever made any money from it. None of them ever had a life on earth that was beneficial from claiming Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And yet, none of them ever spoke anything else. I hope you never get called on to be a martyr. But use it as a measurement. And this is not an accusatory, but I'm calling you to consider your Christianity. And I want to put it to you in two different ways. And I had to change the sport because I don't understand basketball. But you might think you know basketball, and you can come in and absolutely know correctly that Michael Jordan is better than LeBron James. And then you sit down with someone in this conversation and they tell you what the statistics were for the 7th man off the bench in the 93 Bulls team. And you all of a sudden just went for, and I thought of you. You probably can. You all of a sudden go from I'm an expert because I know a guy to that guy is an expert because he knows all the guys. What am I talking about? We're having a great time worshiping God in heaven. Okay, I don't know what day because there's only one day. We've been there a while. And we take a break from praise. And you sit down next to Polycarp. And you still smell the smoke on him. And he looks at you and says, tell me about your struggle. And you say, man, I taught Bible class once. Man, I didn't know some of the songs we sang. I didn't go to flag football practice on Wednesday because I came to church. Polycarp goes, yeah. Sounds like a struggle. Sounds like you really had to fight. I'm not making accusation. We have to all live our lives. We all have to all answer. And the purpose of these martyrs is not to make us feel accused, but to say, I can see their faith, and that's faith that I need to emulate as well. Later on in the chapter, therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make your paths straight, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. This has not been a message to strengthen your faith necessarily, but just to ask you to evaluate it. Evaluate your faith and where you stand in the pantheon of the saints of old and of tomorrow, especially of tomorrow. Those are your children that will have to deal with whatever those chuckleheads in Washington come up with. This is a call for resolve, as we have already sang, to strengthen your resolve to follow Jesus wherever it is that He may call. He was called to the grave for your salvation, as we read from 1 Corinthians 15 this morning. If you have any questions on that, I'd love to discuss it with you. If you cannot imagine dying for Jesus, can you imagine Him dying for you? And can you fully appreciate that? Because that's exactly what He came here to do. His entire purpose from the beginning was to die to save your soul. And if you need to fix something between yourself and your God, do not delay. Fix it now as we stand and sing.